At the engagement dinner I had funded, the laughter froze when my daughter raised her glass and declared she had no father. Her fiancé's dad slid into my chair, smiling, while my hands trembled beneath the table. The receipts were still in my pocket. $19,600 in charges, $7,200 to the catering hall, $4,800 for her dress, $3,900 on flowers, and the rest scattered across endless deposits. My chest burned as heat rose, vision blurring, while the crowd applauded his false, "Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from." The chandeliers above the hall glowed like captured stars, scattering light across the polished tables and glittering centerpieces. I had chosen them myself, flipping through catalogs late at night while invoices stacked higher on my desk. Every polished glass, every plate of roasted lamb, every petal on the roses had been carved out of my savings. It was supposed to be her night, my daughter's night. I sat at the far end of the long head table, tucked between a chair no one filled and the aisle where waiters passed briskly. My hands stayed folded in my lap, fingers pressing against the receipts still tucked in my jacket pocket. $7,200 for the catering hall, $4,800 for her gown, $3,900 for flowers, and countless smaller deposits. The numbers echoed in my chest like nails in wood. Her laughter carried across the hall. She was radiant, draped in silk that shimmered under the lights. Guests leaned toward her, raising glasses in admiration. At her side, her fiancé grinned with the smug ease of a man who had paid nothing for the banquet that displayed his name. I lifted my glass when the music softened, a hush falling across the room. She rose, her gown whispering against the floor, and held her flute high. Her eyes swept the crowd, glittering with tears, then narrowed slightly when they reached me. "My fiancé," she began, her voice trembling just enough to sound heartfelt, "has shown me what real love and family feel like. His parents have supported us in every way." A ripple of applause stirred. She turned, smiling sweetly at his father and mother, her voice sharpening as she added, "I stand here tonight with no father of my own." The words struck like glass breaking. The room froze for me, though everyone else seemed to keep moving. Glasses clinked, guests smiled. The applause swelled like thunder rolling through the hall. I sat still, my hand tightening around the stem of my glass until it threatened to snap. "She has no father," I heard whispered near me, repeated like gossip already taking root. My throat burned, but no sound came. Across the table, her fiancé's father leaned back, a smirk curling at the edges of his mouth. He reached out, patted my daughter's shoulder, and rose as though the toast had been meant for him. Without a pause, he slid into the empty chair beside her. My chair, the one I had left briefly to stand during introductions earlier. He pulled it close, filling the space as though I had never been there at all. "Family is about who shows up," he said loudly, his voice carrying just enough to reach the ears of those clapping around us. Several nodded in approval. My chest tightened, heat rising until my vision blurred at the edges. I lowered my gaze, forcing my lips into something that resembled a smile. The hall roared with cheer, but inside me there was only silence. I thought of the invoices signed with my name, the late nights cutting checks, the careful planning so she would have everything perfect. And here I was, erased with a single sentence, replaced with a single smirk. The applause went on and on. My daughter leaned against his shoulder, and I stayed in my seat, still as stone. My hands trembled in my lap, brushing against the folded receipts. Paper, stiff and undeniable, pressed back like a reminder. Proof that I existed. But no one looked at me. The music swelled again, violins stitching cheer back into the air, but I heard none of it. All I caught were fragments, laughter spilling across the tables, forks striking plates, the clink of glasses celebrating a lie. A guest leaned across to whisper, "What a touching speech." Another chimed in, "That man is a true father figure." Their eyes flicked toward the smiling patriarch now holding court beside my daughter. I felt invisible, like a shadow cut out from the very celebration I had built. I shifted in my chair, fingers tightening around the folded stack in my pocket. The numbers came back unbidden, each one a weight. $7,200 for the hall, $4,800 for the gown, $3,900 for flowers, and dozens of smaller charges that had bled me dry. Every dollar had been love disguised as paper, and every page was proof of devotion she had chosen to erase. I wanted to speak. My lips parted once, then closed again. What would I say? That the man beside her had not paid a cent? That I had sacrificed years of savings for this single night? My words would have drowned under their applause, mocked as bitterness. So I stayed quiet. The stillness wrapped around me like a shield, though inside my chest a fire burned hotter with each passing second. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I sipped my wine, forcing my hand steady. The taste was bitter, metallic, as if the glass carried ash instead of red. Around me, they toasted, their voices rising in one chorus, "To family!" The word echoed, cruel and hollow. I set my glass down carefully, making sure it didn't rattle against the table. My palms were damp, but I kept them hidden beneath the linen. The hall erupted again as her fiancé raised his own toast, praising his father for guidance and generosity. Laughter rolled like a wave, sweeping me further from shore. Not once did anyone glance my way. I could have been a ghost. My daughter's eyes never returned to me, not even for a flicker of acknowledgement. She leaned close to her future in-laws, radiant with pride, while I sat in silence at the edge of the table I had paid to fill. The heat in my chest pressed against my ribs until it felt like something might crack. I forced my expression into calm, though every breath trembled beneath the weight of humiliation. Rage threatened to spill, but I swallowed it whole. Under the table, my fingers brushed the stack of receipts again. Thin slips of proof, crumpled at the edges, yet heavier than all their laughter. They did not clap for me, but the paper remembered. The paper held the truth. I stayed seated until the music rose again and plates were cleared. My face never shifted. I gave them no outburst, no spectacle, nothing they could twist into their story. Only silence. But silence was not surrender. As the crowd's cheer thundered one last time, I leaned back, steadying my breath. My chest still burned, but the fire had shape now. It was no longer grief alone. It was intent. That night, erased in front of everyone, I realized what they tried to take from me could be reclaimed in a language louder than applause. A language written in receipts, signatures, and truth. And I already had the first page in my pocket. The morning after the dinner, the echo of her toast still rang in my ears. I have no father. I repeated it to myself in the quiet of my kitchen, the coffee cooling untouched on the counter. I wanted to believe it had been a slip of the tongue, something rehearsed poorly, but the memory of her smile told me it was deliberate. I pulled out the folder I kept for her, an account I had started years ago, the one that was supposed to help her step into adulthood without struggle. It had been my secret pride, built from overtime hours, cut vacations, and nights when I went without. Opening it felt like opening a chest full of promises. But the numbers staggered me. The balance was a skeleton of what it should have been. Withdrawals littered the ledger, each one stamped with a date I never approved. Transfers to names I didn't recognize. I flipped through them, heart pounding louder with every page. Some were small, a few hundred here or there. Others were massive, several thousand drained in a single day. When I asked her about it later, over a casual family dinner, she tilted her head with mock innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about, Dad," she said, stabbing her fork into the salad. "I never touched it." Across the table, her fiancé's father smirked, sipping his wine as though he'd been waiting for this moment. "She deserves more than your crumbs," he muttered, just loud enough to slice through the air. My daughter said nothing. She let the silence settle, heavy and cruel. I nodded slowly, pushing the conversation no further. But inside, a line had been crossed. The toast had humiliated me. This theft buried me. And now I knew. This wasn't carelessness. It was conspiracy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder spread, open, receipts scattered like fallen leaves. The lamplight caught the edges of each page, turning them into blades. Every number cut deeper. The transfers were deliberate, timed to avoid suspicion. Always on Fridays, late evenings, or around holidays when banks were slow to flag activity. Some even routed through small vendors before landing in larger accounts, as if someone had been coached on how to make theft look like routine expenses. I started matching charges to memories. A new watch I'd seen on her fiancé's wrist. A sudden vacation photo they had posted online, smiling on a beach I never paid for. Even the flowers at the engagement dinner matched the invoices I was staring at. My own generosity had been twisted into their theater. The betrayal sharpened when I found her signature. Scrawled, uneven, but mine was nowhere beside it. Withdrawal slips signed in her hand, countersigned by a man whose name I finally recognized, her fiancé's father. The pieces locked together like cruel puzzle work. At Sunday dinner, I tried again, my voice calm though my chest burned. "You drained the account," I said softly, setting the folder on the table. She didn't look at me. Her fork scraped across the plate. "I told you, I didn't touch it." Her fiancé smirked this time. "Maybe it's just mismanagement. Happens when people don't understand money." Laughter trickled around the table, quiet but sharp enough to sting. His father leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on me. "She's building a future, not hoarding crumbs. You should be proud she's finally free of needing you." I stayed silent, though my knuckles whitened against the folder's edge. Their words echoed, but so did something else, the undeniable proof under my palm. They thought denial would erase reality. But I had the slips, the signatures, the timeline. They thought silence meant surrender. It would not. After that dinner, I stopped arguing. Words were wasted on people who had already decided I no longer mattered. But silence gave me space to work. I laid everything out on my desk at home. Each receipt, each withdrawal slip, every bank statement stacked in order. The table looked less like family finances and more like evidence prepared for trial. And maybe in some way, that was exactly what it was becoming. I traced the first transfer, a $1,200 withdrawal labeled as event deposit. It lined up perfectly with a weekend trip they had taken, photos tagged online with champagne in hand. Then a $2,800 transfer marked as miscellaneous. The same week her fiancé showed off a brand new laptop. The deeper I went, the clearer the pattern became. They had been siphoning my account like a private reservoir, dipping in whenever they wanted comfort or status. Each page revealed not just theft, but arrogance. They weren't hiding carefully. They assumed I would never check, never question, never resist. Late at night, I highlighted the entries. my pen, scratching over the paper while the house stayed silent around me. I caught my reflection in the dark window. Tired eyes, clenched jaw, a man who had paid for everything only to be erased in return. That realization was heavier than the numbers. It wasn't just money. It was my years, my trust, my role as a father, rewritten by their greed. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a shift inside me. Humiliation gave way to something steadier. I didn't need to shout or argue across a table anymore. I needed only to keep building this record, piece by piece. Paper doesn't lie. And one day soon, the same arrogance that silenced me would make them choke on their own signatures. The following week, I joined them again at a family gathering. The table was full of chatter, wine glasses refilled before they were ever empty. I watched, silent, as my daughter leaned into her fiancé's side, her laughter spilling over like it had at the dinner. His father sat across from me, his grin slow and deliberate. Between bites of steak, he leaned forward and said, "She has a future now. Not scraps. You should be proud." The words slid across the table like poison. No one defended me. No one even glanced in my direction. I reached for my glass, swirling the red liquid calmly, though inside my chest there was only fire. I didn't argue. I didn't lift my voice. I didn't demand recognition. I let their arrogance settle, thick and heavy, coating the air like smoke. Underneath the table, my thumb pressed against the folder of documents I had carried with me, tucked inside my bag. I didn't open it. Not yet. They didn't deserve to see it. Not until the right moment. Instead, I nodded once, as if their words had landed and broken me. Let them believe I was small. Let them believe I was powerless. But in silence, I counted every missing dollar. In silence, I matched every receipt to their indulgences. In silence, I turned each insult into fuel. When I finally left the table that night, I carried nothing but a still face and a quiet promise. They thought they had stolen from me without consequence. What they didn't see was the weight I carried in my bag. The proof. The same proof that one day would make their laughter sound like the last gasp of something already finished. At home, I placed the folder on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long while before opening it. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, steady and unbothered, as if mocking how chaotic my thoughts had become. When I finally spread the papers out, they covered the table end to end. Bank slips, invoices, withdrawal forms, deposit confirmations, pieces of my devotion transformed into their theft. I began cataloging, each transaction, each date, each signature. I wrote them out by hand into a notebook, drawing thin lines between expenses and memories. A $1,200 withdrawal, their sudden trip to the coast, photos posted online with cocktails raised. A $2,400 check. The week her fiancé's mother hosted a party, bragging about their family support. The evidence wasn't abstract anymore. It was concrete, ink on paper, each page cutting through the lie of their smiles. Halfway through, I stopped and picked up a leather-bound ledger I had once used to track my business expenses. It had been gathering dust in the cabinet, but tonight it became something else. With slow, steady strokes of my pen, I started a new record. Line 1. Engagement dinner, $7,200 catering hall, paid in full. Line 2. Dress, $4,800, paid in full. Line 3. Flowers, $3,900, paid in full. I kept writing, deposit after deposit, withdrawal after withdrawal. Each entry sharpened the truth, turning vague suspicions into a map of betrayal. My hands moved without hesitation, steadying as the weight of each number sank into the page. I paused only once, staring at the ledger. A thought came quietly. This book might outlast me, but if it does, it will tell the truth better than I ever could with words. I closed it carefully, smoothing my palm over the leather cover. This ledger changed everything, I whispered to the empty room. It was no longer just a folder of receipts. It was evidence, and it was only the beginning. The next morning I carried the ledger into the living room and cleared the coffee table. Piece by piece, I spread the documents across it, forming a timeline. The pattern grew sharper with every page. I matched transfers against dates on their social media. A $1,500 withdrawal aligned with photos of them at a ski lodge, bundled in luxury gear. Another $2,800 vanished the same week a shiny new laptop appeared in his hands. Even the smallest amounts told a story. $350 for a spa treatment, $220 for a dinner that they captioned, "Family generosity knows no limits." The phrase stung, but also confirmed what I suspected. They weren't hiding their theft. They were parading it as though I had willingly funded every indulgence. I went to the bank that afternoon, folder in hand. The clerk looked uneasy when I asked for printed copies of past statements. She recognized my daughter's name, her fiancé's as well, and hesitated. But after a moment, she nodded. "You'll want the original stamps," she whispered, sliding the stack across the counter. "Makes it harder for anyone to dispute." Her words stayed with me. Harder to dispute. Back home, I laid the stamped papers on top of my copies. The weight of the ink felt heavier than the paper itself. This was no longer my suspicion alone. It was fact, notarized by the very system they had tried to exploit. Late that night, I traced the signatures again. Her handwriting was rushed, almost careless. His father's was crisp, deliberate, placed beside hers like a shadow guiding her hand. Every forged approval was another nail driven into the coffin of their story. I didn't need to shout at them across a dinner table. Their arrogance had already signed the confession for me. When I closed the ledger that night, I did it slowly, almost ceremonially. The cover snapped shut with a soft thud that echoed louder than any words I might have spoken. The truth was no longer fragile. It was built into ink, stamps, and dates, and if they thought I would let it rot in silence, they were wrong. I began watching them differently after that. Their words no longer floated past me like casual remarks. I measured each sentence against the evidence in my ledger. At a small lunch gathering, my daughter mentioned how stressful the wedding planning had been. Her fiancé added with a grin, "Luckily, her family's been supportive. We couldn't have done it without them." I smiled faintly, my fork steady in my hand, though I was already turning pages in my mind. Supportive. The ledger said otherwise. They weren't grateful for my sacrifices. They were rewriting them as their own. His father joined in, patting his son's shoulder. "We've carried most of the burden. That's what family does." The lie slid across the table like ice. I didn't correct him. Instead, I looked at my daughter. For the briefest second, her eyes flickered toward mine, then darted away. That flicker told me she knew. She knew where the money came from. And still she let him speak. I went home that evening and opened the ledger again. I added notes beside certain transactions. Ski lodge equals January 15th post, spa equals February 3rd photo, laptop equals March 9th brag. The evidence was no longer numbers alone. It was now connected to timestamps, pictures, public proof. Each link in the chain made their story weaker, mine stronger. One night, while reviewing the files, I noticed a repeated pattern. Transfers approved under my daughter's name often carried a second signature, always the same, her fiancé's father. The arrogance of it nearly stunned me. He hadn't just enabled it, He had made himself part of the paper trail. They believed their confidence was protection. But to me, it was an open confession dressed as paperwork. I placed the ledger flat on the desk and stared at it for a long time. My reflection shimmered faintly on the glossy leather cover, tired but steady. They thought they were clever. They thought silence made me weak. But I wasn't silent anymore. Not inside. The evidence was growing like a shadow, and it was beginning to swallow every lie they had told. By the end of the week, my desk no longer looked like a place to pay bills. It looked like a command center. Folders stacked in neat piles, receipts sorted by category, bank statements sealed in plastic sleeves. The ledger lay in the center like a spine, holding everything together. I began making copies, scanned, printed, and backed up on a drive I kept hidden in the lining of an old briefcase. I wasn't preparing for a simple argument anymore. I was preparing for war, though I had no intention of letting them see the battlefield yet. At night, I sat in the quiet and flipped through the ledger. My notes grew sharper. Red ink for withdrawals, black for deposits, blue for moments they flaunted what wasn't theirs. Each page felt less like an account and more like testimony waiting to be read aloud. The silence became my strength. At family meals, when they dropped sly remarks about who really supported the wedding, I stayed calm, nodding as if I agreed. Every insult, every false boast slid into the ledger in some form, recorded in memory, matched to paper. One evening, my daughter's fiancé laughed, waving his glass of wine. "We've learned to handle finances better than most people twice our age," he bragged. I smiled faintly, fingers brushing the cover of the ledger hidden in my bag. "I'm sure you have," I said quietly. No one caught the edge in my tone. By then, I no longer needed to prove anything to myself. I had the dates, the stamps, the signatures. Proof layered so thick that even their laughter couldn't cover it. They thought my silence meant I was beaten. But silence was only the mask. Behind it, the case had already been built. As I closed the ledger that night, the soft snap of the cover echoed through the empty room. It felt final, like the sound of a door locking. They had mocked me, erased me, stolen from me. But every signature they left behind had become another chain tightening around their future. And when the time came, I would not need to shout. The pages would speak for me. The first threat came wrapped in politeness. A casual call from my daughter's fiancé, his voice smooth, practiced. "We've been thinking about moving the deed into safer hands," he said lightly. "You know, just to avoid confusion when the wedding is finalized. It'll make everything easier for her." I sat at my desk, the ledger open in front of me. My pen tapped once against the margin, steady and calm. "And by safer hands," I asked, "you mean yours?" He chuckled. "Ours. Family should trust each other." I let silence stretch long enough that he grew uneasy. Then I ended the call without another word. 2 days later, his father showed up at my door. He didn't wait for an invitation, stepping inside as if the house already belonged to him. His eyes swept the room, landing on the stack of folders near the desk. "You're holding on to things that don't belong to you," he said flatly. "The sooner you understand that, the better." I stayed seated, folding my hands on the table. "Everything in this house has my name on it," he smirked. "Names fade. What matters is who people believe, and they believe me." The words settled like poison, meant to rattle me. But I only leaned back in my chair, steadying my breath. The ledger lay open beside me, its ink sharp and undeniable. He thought threats would corner me. Instead, they became another entry. At the next family dinner, the tension followed me like a shadow. The table was dressed in fine china and wine bottles, laughter circling from one end to the other. I sat quietly, taking my place at the far side, my fork scraping gently against the plate, while their voices rose above mine. Halfway through the meal, her fiancé leaned back, resting his arm on the chair like a king addressing his court. "Some people hold on to property they don't even use," he said, his eyes cutting toward me. "But clinging to things never ends well. A real man knows when to hand over control." The laughter that followed was sharp, practiced. My daughter glanced down at her plate, her silence louder than any insult. I lifted my glass and took a slow sip, forcing my face into calm. I gave them nothing. His father joined in, pressing harder. "You've done enough. You'll sign it, or you'll lose her forever." His tone carried across the table, and the room fell quiet enough for every guest to hear. The words struck, cruel and calculated. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to defend myself, to create a spectacle they could twist into weakness. Instead, I set my glass down gently. "Noted," I said softly. Nothing more. Their smirks widened, certain they had won. They mistook silence for surrender. But under the table, my hand brushed the folded receipts I carried in my jacket pocket. Each slip of paper was a shield. Each entry in my ledger, a blade. I didn't need to shout. I only needed to wait. The threats didn't stop at the table. They followed me into the quiet of my evenings, carried through phone calls and messages that grew bolder with every passing day. One night, the phone rang just after midnight. I answered, my voice steady though my chest tightened. Her fiancé's father spoke first, his tone dripping with authority. "You're wasting everyone's time. We'll have the papers drafted. Sign them, and this can stay civil." "And if I don't?" I asked. His pause was brief, his confidence unshaken. "Then she has no father. Not now, not ever. She'll never look back at you. You'll die alone while we build her future." The line went quiet, except for his breathing. I let the silence linger, then ended the call without a word. The next day, a message arrived on my phone. A single sentence from her fiancé. "Family is who stands beside you, not the one who hides behind receipts." I read it twice, then saved the screenshot into a hidden folder. Another piece for the record. They wanted me rattled. They wanted desperation. But the truth was simpler. Every insult, every threat was another confession dressed in arrogance. I sat at my desk that evening, the ledger open again, and wrote in the margin, "They believe silence is surrender. They don't know silence is preparation." The words steadied me. The final blow of their escalation came in public. It was a weekend brunch, a gathering of extended family and friends. The restaurant buzzed with chatter, glasses clinking, sunlight spilling across white tablecloths. I had barely touched my plate when her fiancé raised his voice just enough for nearby tables to hear. "Some men can't accept when their time is over. They cling to power they never really had." His eyes flicked toward me, his smile sharp. "But a real family moves forward without dead weight." Laughter broke out around him, scattered but cruel. My daughter said nothing, only kept her gaze fixed on the bread basket in front of her. That silence was sharper than his words. His father leaned in across the table, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Sign it, or watch her cut you out forever. This is your last chance." Every eye seemed to turn toward me. I felt the weight of the moment pressing down, daring me to explode, to defend myself in front of them all. But I didn't. Instead, I placed my napkin gently on the table, smoothing it flat with calm hands. "Thank you for the meal," I said softly. Then I rose, leaving my plate half full. Gasps rippled behind me. Some thought it was surrender, others weakness. They believed they had silenced me. What none of them noticed was the small, leather-bound ledger tucked under my arm as I walked away. I wasn't leaving broken. I was leaving prepared. And the next time we sat across from each other, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. The pages would speak for me. The Monday after that brunch, I carried the ledger into a law office downtown. The waiting room was quiet, the kind of silence where the ticking clock felt louder than conversation. When they finally called my name, I stepped into a small office lined with heavy books and certificates. My lawyer, an older man with a sharp eye, adjusted his glasses as I laid the leather-bound book on his desk. Slowly, I began spreading the documents across the polished surface. Receipts, withdrawal slips, bank statements stamped with official seals. He leaned forward, scanning the first few pages, his brow tightening. "How long have you been keeping this record?" "Since the night she said I wasn't her father," I replied. My voice was steady, almost detached. He turned another page, then another, his hand pausing on the signatures. "They've left fingerprints everywhere. You don't need to chase them. They've already built your case for you." I nodded, though the burn in my chest remained. "I'm not here to argue with them. I'm here to make sure their story doesn't survive." We spent hours building a plan. He explained what documents would hold weight in court, what witnesses might matter, what steps I should take to secure every record. I wrote it all down, line by line, as though it were another ledger entry. Before I left, he closed the book gently and looked at me. "Don't confront them directly. Let the paper do the shouting." Walking out of his office, I carried the folder tighter than before. It no longer felt like scraps of paper. It felt like armor. That night, I backed everything up. I scanned the receipts, labeled the files, stored them on a drive I hid in a drawer beneath old tools. I kept copies on cloud storage, protected by passwords only I knew. Every document existed in 3 forms now: paper, digital, and stamped originals. They thought silence was weakness, but silence had become preparation. And preparation, I realized, was louder than any insult they could throw across a table. I returned to the bank the next morning, carrying only a slim folder this time. The clerk who had helped me before met my eyes with a cautious smile. She seemed to understand without my needing to explain. "I'll need certified copies," I said quietly, sliding the forms across the counter. Every page, every signature, sealed and stamped. She nodded, her hands moving quickly. "You'll want duplicates. Originals stay in the archive, but these will hold in court." When she handed them back, the weight of the official seals felt different in my hand. Firmer. Undeniable. Another chain in the armor I was building. I didn't stop there. At the clerk's office downtown, I requested property records, cross-checking deeds and tax filings. The names were exactly where I expected them to be. Mine, printed clearly. The contrast between those records and their arrogant boasts was staggering. Later that week, I paid a quiet visit to a notary I had known for years. She raised an eyebrow at the stack of documents I set before her. "Preparing for something?" she asked. "Just making sure no one rewrites the truth," I answered. She stamped each page carefully, her seal pressing into the paper with finality. Every thud of her press felt like a nail securing the truth into place. By evening, my arsenal was no longer just paper. It was notarized, stamped, and filed in multiple offices. Each step stripped away their illusion, piece by piece. Still, I remained silent at family gatherings. They mocked me more openly now, certain my quiet meant defeat. At one dinner, her fiancé laughed. "He thinks signatures make him strong, but families aren't built on paper." I let the remark hang, then replied calmly, "Families run on deeds, not noise." The table went quiet for a moment. the weight of my words pressing against their smug grins. They didn't understand yet. They thought it was only bitterness. But to me, it was prophecy. And every document sealed that truth tighter. Preparation became my nightly ritual. After work, I sat at the desk surrounded by stacks of paper and the steady glow of my laptop. Each receipt was scanned, named, and uploaded into folders that mirrored the structure of my ledger. Red folders for withdrawals, blue for deposits, green for notarized records. I created backups on encrypted drives, 2 stored at home, and 1 slipped quietly into a safe deposit box. If they thought they could bury me, they would have to dig through a fortress of duplicates. But documents alone were not enough. I began reaching out, quietly testing the ground for allies. One evening, I stopped by a small print shop I'd used for years. The owner, an older man with kind eyes, watched as I slid a stack of copied receipts across the counter. "Another round of backups?" he asked. "Something like that," I replied. His nod was simple, but the look in his eyes told me he understood more than he said. A few days later, I had a conversation with a neighbor who had been at the engagement dinner. She lowered her voice when she spoke. "Everyone saw what they did. No one will say it out loud, but we noticed." Her words carried weight. Optics were shifting, even if whispers were all I had for now. I documented those whispers too. Dates, times, notes in the ledger. Witness-confirmed presence, remarks overheard. The evidence was no longer just numbers and receipts. It was stories, voices, and observations that formed a wider net. At the next family dinner, I stayed as quiet as ever, but this time I carried something different with me. Not only the ledger, but a thumb drive hidden in my pocket. Every insult they hurled across the table became less of a wound and more of an addition to my arsenal. They believed silence was weakness. But every time I left their table, I walked away stronger. They hadn't realized yet that while they sharpened their threats, I was sharpening my proof. By the end of the month, the arsenal was complete. My desk no longer resembled a man's quiet study. It looked like a vault of truths waiting to be unsealed. The ledger sat in the center, its pages filled with ink that told the story of betrayal, line by line. Around it were notarized documents, certified bank statements, and property records that carried my name in bold print. Thumb drives rested in locked boxes, each one holding scanned duplicates. In the safe deposit box downtown, an identical set waited untouched, ready to outlive me if necessary. I had built a fortress from paper and silence. At the next family gathering, they continued their charade. Her fiancé raised his glass, grinning at his father. "Some people are too stubborn to let go, but we all know who's been carrying the real weight." Laughter rose again, predictable and hollow. I sat still, my face calm, my hand brushing the edge of the ledger tucked inside my bag. They didn't notice the difference. To them, I was the same quiet figure they had always dismissed. But inside, something had shifted. I no longer carried humiliation. I carried evidence. And evidence, I knew, had teeth. After dinner, as I walked to my car, I paused under the streetlight. I looked back at the house where their laughter still spilled through the windows. For the first time, I felt no sting. Their voices sounded smaller than they had before, like echoes in a hollow chamber. I whispered to myself, steady and calm. "Families run on deeds, not noise." The words weren't a defense anymore. They were a promise. Because soon, the noise would fade. The documents would take center stage. And when they did, every signature they left behind would testify louder than their laughter ever had. The first shift came quietly, carried in whispers. A neighbor stopped me one morning as I collected the mail. She glanced around before speaking. "I was at the engagement dinner," she said softly. "We all saw how they treated you." Her words lingered longer than the conversation itself. I nodded, thanked her, and walked back inside with the envelope still unopened in my hand. Later that week, I overheard murmurs at the local market. 2 vendors spoke in low voices while arranging crates of fruit. "Imagine funding the whole thing and being told you're nothing," one said. "Everyone saw it," the other replied. "It was cruel." Their voices carried just far enough for me to catch. They didn't realize I was only a few steps away. The arrogance of my daughter's fiancé and his father had spilled too far, too publicly. People were talking, and the story was no longer theirs to control. At a Sunday service, I caught more stares than usual. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with quiet anger aimed at the family that had humiliated me. No one said it directly, but the silence in those pews felt like a verdict. The tide was shifting. And this time, it wasn't my silence fueling it. It was theirs. The whispers didn't stay behind closed doors for long. They slipped onto screens. A week after that Sunday service, someone posted a photo from the engagement dinner. In the picture, my daughter and her fiancé's family were laughing at the head table. I was visible too, off to the side, hands folded, expression unreadable. The caption was simple. "Not everyone at the table was celebrated." The comments filled quickly. "Wait, wasn't it her father who paid for everything? I heard he covered the whole hall. Then why's he sitting like a guest no one wanted?" I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The thread grew on its own, each remark peeling back the mask they had worked so hard to keep in place. At the grocery store, a clerk I'd known for years gave me a quiet nod as she bagged my items. "People are starting to see it," she whispered. "Everyone saw the truth now." Even vendors began to shift their tone. The florist who had arranged the engagement centerpieces stopped me in the parking lot one afternoon. "They didn't pay a cent," she said bitterly. "Your checks covered it all, and still they acted like it was theirs." Her voice trembled with frustration, as though the insult had spilled onto her too. The truth was no longer locked in my ledger. It was living in the mouths of others. And once it spread, there was no pulling it back. The first time they sensed the shift was at a community fundraiser. My daughter and her fiancé arrived hand in hand, dressed sharp, smiles wide. His father followed close behind, nodding at everyone as if he owned the room. But the room no longer belonged to them. Conversations quieted when they passed. Smiles faded into stiff nods. People leaned close to whisper after they turned their backs. During the speeches, one guest joked about generous fathers who pay for everything and get no thanks. The room laughed, but it wasn't a warm laugh. It was sharp, knowing. My daughter's face tightened for an instant before her smile returned, stretched thin. I stood at the back, unseen, watching. Their confidence looked different now, fragile at the edges. They poured drinks faster, laughed louder, but the sound didn't carry the same weight. It sounded desperate. Later that night, I overheard his father trying to reassure a colleague. "People will always talk," he said with a dismissive wave. "We've given more than anyone else." But the man only nodded politely, his eyes sliding toward me before moving away. They were losing the crowd, losing the story. And the more they insisted on their version, the clearer it became that no one was buying it anymore. The breaking point came at a wedding expo, where vendors, planners, and families all gathered under one roof. My daughter and her fiancé walked the aisles as if they were royalty, his father trailing behind with his usual air of command. But whispers followed them everywhere. I caught fragments as I lingered near the booths. "Isn't that the girl who said she had no father? Funny, I heard he paid for the whole thing. They're not as generous as they pretend." Every booth they stopped at, the smiles they received were polite but cold. Some vendors offered only half answers, unwilling to be seen supporting them too openly. I stood at a distance, hands in my pockets, saying nothing. The shift didn't need my voice. It was happening on its own. When they reached a catering booth, the vendor asked, "And who's paying this time?" The words seemed casual, but the tone carried a blade. My daughter flushed red, her fiancé forced a laugh, and his father tightened his jaw. They moved quickly after that, their confidence fraying in every step. By the time they left, I knew the tide had turned completely. The community no longer saw them as generous hosts. They saw them as thieves dressed in borrowed pride. I walked out quietly, my pace steady. For the first time in months, I felt no weight pressing on my chest. The ledger was still in my bag, but I didn't need to open it. The world had already begun to read the truth aloud. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, the kind of scent that carried weight. I sat at the plaintiff's table, the leather-bound ledger resting in front of me like an anchor. Across the aisle, my daughter sat with her fiancé and his father, their lawyer whispering hurriedly into their ears. They avoided my gaze, or maybe they couldn't hold it. The judge entered, robes sweeping, voice steady as she called the case. My lawyer rose first, calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, what we bring today is not speculation. It is proof." He opened the ledger and slid the first packet of receipts onto the bench. Every cent spent on this engagement, every dollar drained from the account, was paid by my client. Not by the defendants, not by their families. Him. And we can show it. Their lawyer scoffed, rising quickly. "These are exaggerations. My clients merely received support, as families often do. There was no theft, no misrepresentation." The judge's gaze narrowed. "We'll see." Page by page, the story unfolded. Certified bank slips, withdrawal forms with her rushed signature, transfers co-signed by his father. Every document carried a stamp, a date, an unshakable truth. Murmurs filled the courtroom as the evidence grew thicker. My lawyer pointed to one page in particular. "Here, a transfer of $3,900 for flowers, and here, photos posted online by the defendants, boasting about the arrangements. Same date, same vendor, paid entirely by my client." Her fiancé shifted uncomfortably. His father leaned forward, jaw tight. Finally, the judge turned toward their table. "Do you contest these receipts?" Their lawyer cleared his throat. "They are incomplete. Context matters." "According to these receipts," my lawyer interrupted, his voice steady, "he funded every cent." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. I sat still, my hands folded, my face calm. For months, I had carried humiliation in silence. Now the paper spoke for me, louder than any voice I could have raised. Across the aisle, my daughter finally looked at me. Her eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen in years. Not pride, not respect, fear. Their lawyer stood quickly, adjusting his tie as if the motion alone could reset the room. "Your Honor, these documents show only generosity. A father helping his daughter is no crime. If anything, my clients have been pressured by his control, by his need to claim ownership of her future." He gestured toward me, his tone sharp. "This is not theft. This is obsession." I didn't move. My lawyer simply placed another stack of papers on the table. "Then perhaps the defendants can explain why funds were transferred directly into accounts bearing the father-in-law's name." The courtroom shifted with murmurs. The judge leaned forward. "Is this accurate?" Their lawyer hesitated. "My client merely facilitated. These were gestures of good faith." The father rose suddenly, his arrogance cracking into fury. "I've done more for her than he ever has. I gave her stability, direction, a family worth standing beside. He only gave her money." The judge's gavel struck once, the sound echoing through the chamber. "Sit down, sir." He obeyed, but the words were already out there, heavy and condemning. My daughter's fiancé tried next, his voice smoother but no steadier. "He's twisting this. My wife-to-be deserved a wedding worthy of her, and we all contributed. Maybe he wrote checks, but we gave her love." My lawyer opened the ledger again, turning it toward the bench. "Love doesn't drain an account. Love doesn't forge signatures. Love doesn't redirect funds into private accounts. These are not contributions. These are thefts, documented and stamped." I glanced at my daughter. She sat rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. The silence between us felt like a canyon. The judge finally spoke, her voice even but firm. "The evidence is consistent. The paper trail is clear. We will continue tomorrow with testimony, but let it be noted, these documents strongly suggest misappropriation of funds." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled. Spectators leaned forward. Across the aisle, their lawyer whispered frantically, shuffling papers that could never outweigh mine. Their faces shifted from arrogance to unease, from smug confidence to barely concealed panic. I stayed seated, calm, my hands still folded. I didn't need to argue. The receipts argued for me, and for the first time I could see it, the cracks in their story spreading faster than they could patch them. The next morning, the courtroom was fuller than before. Word had spread. Vendors, neighbors, even strangers curious for drama filled the benches. My daughter sat pale, her fiancé whispering frantically in her ear. His father stared straight ahead, jaw locked tight. The first witness was the florist. She stepped forward nervously, smoothing her apron as she took the stand. "Who paid for the engagement flowers?" my lawyer asked. She didn't hesitate. "He did," she said, pointing directly at me. "Every dollar. They never once came in with money of their own." The defense lawyer tried to shake her. "Perhaps you're mistaken. Couldn't funds have come from them indirectly?" She shook her head firmly. "I saw the checks. I stamped the receipts. His name was on everyone." Murmurs rippled again. Next came the catering manager. His testimony was the same. Every invoice, every signature, mine, not theirs. One by one, the witnesses confirmed what my ledger had already made undeniable. Their lies were collapsing under the weight of ordinary voices. Finally, the banker stepped up. His tone was calm, professional, and absolute. "All major transfers originated from the plaintiff's accounts. Several withdrawals bear forged signatures. And here," he held up a document with the bank's seal. "You can see the co-signature belonging to the defendant's father." Gasps cut through the room. The father shifted in his seat, sweat glistening at his temple. His lawyer's objections rang hollow, smothered by the clarity of the paper. I sat still, listening, never interrupting. My silence was deliberate, my calm a mirror against their unraveling noise. At one point, her fiancé snapped, his voice rising. "This is ridiculous. He's twisting everything to make us look greedy." The judge's eyes narrowed. "The documents, the witnesses, and the bank say otherwise. Sit down." He obeyed, but his anger echoed in the silence that followed. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I only rested my hand on the ledger lying closed before me. The same book that had carried me through sleepless nights. Every page, every number, every stamped seal was speaking now, and it was louder than their insults had ever been. By the third day, the air in the courtroom felt different. Their side no longer walked in with the swagger they had carried before. The father avoided eye contact. The fiancé clenched his jaw until it trembled, and my daughter stared at the floor, her hands twisting in her lap. The judge reviewed the final stack of evidence: certified transfers, notarized records, vendor testimony, all neatly aligned with the ledger I had carried for months. Her gavel tapped lightly against the bench as she spoke. The evidence presented is extensive and consistent. The plaintiff's financial responsibility is clear. The defendant's claims of shared contribution are unsupported and contradicted by official records. At this stage, the court recognizes strong grounds for misappropriation of funds. Her words fell heavy, undeniable. Gasps filled the room. Reporters scribbled faster. A camera clicked, catching the moment my daughter buried her face in her hands. The defense lawyer tried one last stand. "Your Honor, surely this is a matter of family conflict, not law. To drag this into court is—" The judge cut him off. "What drags this into court are forged signatures, stolen funds, and lies told under oath. This is no longer just family. This is fraud." Silence swallowed the room. Across the aisle, her fiancé's father broke. He slammed a fist against the table, his voice raw. "We built her future. He just wants to ruin it." The judge's gavel cracked down, sharp as thunder. "Enough. One more outburst and you'll be removed." He sank back, face red, but the damage was done. Every mask they had worn had fallen in public view. I sat still, my hand resting on the closed ledger. I hadn't spoken more than a handful of words, yet everything I carried had been laid bare for me. As the session ended, the judge's voice echoed one last time. "We will reconvene for sentencing." In the meantime, the defendants are barred from accessing contested accounts. The gavel struck. The sound was final, heavier than applause, louder than laughter. I stood slowly, gathering the ledger. My daughter's eyes met mine for a fleeting second. They were wide, frightened, shimmering with something that looked like regret. But it was too late. I walked out of the courtroom into the bright afternoon sun. The cameras flashed. Voices called my name. But I didn't speak. The silence had carried me this far. And now, it was carrying them to collapse. The fallout began almost immediately. By the next morning, headlines circled online: "Father erased, funds misused, courtroom bombshell." My name was there, not as a man humiliated at an engagement dinner, but as the one who had carried the weight and exposed the truth. Vendors who had once smiled politely at them now demanded payment. The florist cut ties, the caterer filed notices. Even the hall threatened to sue for outstanding fees once they realized forged approvals had been used to secure extra services. At the market, I overheard whispers again, only this time they weren't about me. She lied about everything. Did you hear the judge call it fraud? They thought they could erase him. Their empire of arrogance cracked in days. The fiancé's father, once so smug, found his phone calls ignored. His name had become poison in the community. My daughter and her fiancé posted smiling photos online, but the comments turned sharp, filled with questions they couldn't silence. I didn't answer any of it. I didn't need to. I only sat in the quiet of my kitchen, ledger closed at last, and listened as the lies unraveled without me lifting a finger. The court's order took effect within days. Their access to the contested accounts was frozen. Payments bounced. Vendors who had waited for the next transfer started calling them instead of me. No one picked up on the second ring. The florist sent a firm note. Balance due within 5 business days. The hall followed with a notice. Reservation canceled for non-payment, fees retained. The caterer's email was short. Invoice referred to collections. I sat at my kitchen table with a quiet cup of tea, and watched the messages come in on my phone, each one a door closing that I did not have to touch. The ledger stayed shut beside me. It did not need to speak anymore. His father tried first, his voice low with anger. "You made a private matter into a spectacle. Fix this. Pay what you started." I answered calmly, "The court is handling it." He spat. "You think these papers make you a man?" I ended the call. I did not save his number. Later, my daughter texted a single line. I did not know it would go this far. I stared at the screen. The words trembled like a hand reaching through smoke. I did not reply. There was nothing left to explain. The documents had already told the story. Clients began to drift from her future father-in-law. A contractor I knew shook his head at the hardware store. "People dislike noise. They hate lies. He burned both." At night, the house felt different. Lighter. I heard no laughter from their side of town, only the hum of my own refrigerator and the soft tick of the kitchen clock. Time moved forward without permission from anyone. I turned the ledger so the spine faced me, then slid it back into the drawer. The wooden rails whispered shut. In the morning, another envelope waited at my door. I placed it on the table, unopened, and drew a slow breath. The collapse was writing itself, did not need to hold the pen. "Peace," I said to the quiet room, "is finally louder." The collapse spread beyond bills and headlines. Invitations once extended to them stopped arriving. At church, pews that had always been theirs stayed empty. In town, conversations quieted when they entered, eyes drifting away instead of toward them. His father, once a man who commanded attention, now drew only murmurs. "Fraud," someone whispered as he passed. "Shame," another replied. He pretended not to hear, but his red face betrayed him. Their wedding plans disintegrated piece by piece. The hall refused to honor the booking. The dressmaker demanded payment before release. Even the band canceled, unwilling to be associated with their scandal. The day they had built as a monument to their pride vanished into thin air. I walked through the market one afternoon and overheard two vendors. She called him her father once, then erased him. Now look. They shook their heads. Their sympathy pointed toward me, not her. My daughter avoided me. Weeks passed without a call, only silence punctuated by the occasional headline. When I did glimpse her once in town, she kept her gaze low, clutching her fiancé's arm like a lifeline. He looked thinner, his smile strained, no trace of arrogance left. Neighbors began stopping by my porch. Some offered words. Others offered nothing more than a nod that carried quiet solidarity. I accepted both. At night, I lit the small lamp by my chair and read without distraction. No more calls demanding signatures. No more threats in the dark. They had built their world on lies. And now I watched, calm and steady, as it fell piece by piece. Their downfall reached its final stage in silence, the same silence they once mistook for weakness. The fiancé's father lost his contracts first. A company statement circulated online. "We no longer associate with individuals under investigation for fraud." His name, once spoken with respect in business circles, became a warning instead. Calls dried up, doors closed, and colleagues who had once clung to him now crossed the street to avoid him. My daughter's fiancé fared no better. His job let him go quietly, citing reputation concerns. He tried to spin the story online, posting about loyalty, family, and standing together. The comments turned against him instantly. "You stood on stolen money. Maybe stand in line for work instead." My daughter disappeared from public view altogether. Her accounts went private. Her name stopped appearing in town. Where there had been arrogance, there was now only absence. And me? I didn't chase them. I didn't need to. I tended to my garden. I read on the porch. I greeted neighbors who passed with quiet smiles. My phone no longer carried threats, only simple messages from people who had seen the truth unfold. One evening, as the sun lowered over the horizon, I closed the ledger for the last time and slid it into the drawer. I didn't need to look at it anymore. Its job was finished. They built their world on lies, I whispered to the still air, and I let it fall. The collapse was complete, and I had not raised my voice once. The weeks after their collapse were quiet, almost unnervingly so at first. No more calls, no more demands, no more laughter from across crowded tables that excluded me. The silence was different now. It was not heavy, not humiliating. It was clean. I found myself waking earlier, watching the sun rise through the kitchen window with a calm I hadn't felt in years. The coffee tasted stronger, not because it had changed, but because I had. Neighbors stopped by now and then. One brought fresh bread. Another offered to help with yard work, though I declined. Their presence wasn't pity. It was respect, the kind that had been absent for too long. At the market, people greeted me differently, not with awkward nods, but with warmth. "You carried it all," someone said once, their hand brushing my shoulder. "You didn't deserve what they did." I only smiled in reply. There was no need to add words. The ledger remained in the drawer, closed and untouched. Its weight no longer pressed against me. It was proof of what I had endured, but I no longer needed to open it. For the first time in months, I sat on the porch one evening and realized I wasn't waiting for anything. No verdict, no message, no confrontation. I was simply living. Thoughts of my daughter came less often now. When they did, they arrived like faint echoes, softer than before. I no longer replayed the toast she gave at the engagement dinner, nor the silence she offered while others spoke for her. There was a time I wanted answers. I wanted her to look me in the eye and admit what she had done, to acknowledge the years I had given, the sacrifices etched into every receipt. But I realized that even if those words came, they would not heal the wound. Healing had already begun without them. I no longer checked for her name in the news or waited for her number to appear on my phone. The absence hurt less than the betrayal ever had. Distance became its own kind of protection. Sometimes I wondered if she thought of me, if regret ever touched her late at night when the noise faded and silence settled in. But I didn't chase those thoughts. They no longer held me captive. One evening, I took the old family photo from the mantel, the one of her as a child smiling in front of a birthday cake. I didn't put it back. I placed it in a box and slid it into the closet. It wasn't rejection. It was release. For years, I had carried her as if my love could shield her from everything. But love without respect is only weight, and I was done carrying what refused to be cherished. In the quiet of those weeks, I began to see silence differently. Once, it had been a prison, chains of humiliation that kept me seated while others mocked. Now, it was a tool, sharpened and deliberate. Silence had preserved my dignity when shouting would have painted me desperate. Silence had given me space to gather proof when anger might have burned it all. And silence had carried me into court, where documents spoke louder than any outburst ever could. What they once mocked as weakness had turned into my greatest strength. I embraced it in my daily life. Mornings on the porch with a book and coffee, evenings in the garden, the soil cool beneath my hands, walks through town, where nods from neighbors spoke more than long conversations. The noise of their world no longer reached me. Their collapse continued somewhere beyond the edge of mine, but it felt distant, like thunder rolling miles away. I didn't chase the sound. I let it pass. One night, under the glow of a single lamp, I opened the drawer and touched the ledger once more. I didn't need to read it. I only rested my palm on the cover, breathing steadily. Then I pushed it back and closed the drawer with finality. I had lived months defined by paper and proof. Now I was defined by something else. Peace. Seasons shifted quietly around me. The leaves turned, the air cooled, and life moved forward. For the first time in years, I felt it moving with me instead of against me. Neighbors still spoke of the trial sometimes, their voices laced with shock at how quickly the proud can fall. But for me, the story was already finished. I had no desire to relive it. I no longer measured my days in receipts or battles. I measured them in small, steady moments. A good meal cooked for myself. A neighbor's wave from across the street. The quiet hum of the evening crickets as I sat outside with nothing to prove. The ledger remained tucked away, not as a weapon but as a reminder. Proof that silence is not surrender. That sometimes the strongest voice in the room belongs to the one who never raised it. I thought once about what I might say if my daughter ever came back. Apologies, excuses, even tears would not erase what had been done. But forgiveness, I realized, is not something I owed. It is something I give myself when I stop carrying their weight. And I had. On a late afternoon, I whispered to the empty porch, "Peace is louder than revenge." The words lingered, soft but final, carried by the wind like a closing line. I leaned back, eyes steady on the horizon. The noise was gone. And at last, I was free. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing.